Here is a story about a unique place. It is a part of Minnesota, but it sits alone. It is cut off from the rest of its state. You can only get there by going through Canada. Or you cross a big lake. It is called the Northwest Angle, and it looks like a tiny hat on top of the United States. Many people do not know it exists, but it is a real place. It has real people living there. And its story is a strange one. It tells us a lot about old maps. It tells us about old agreements. And it tells us about how a few wrong words can change geography forever. This little piece of land is a mystery to some. It is a homeland to others. It sits there, quiet. It is a reminder of how borders are made. Sometimes they are made by clear lines, and sometimes they are made by honest mistakes. The Northwest Angle is not big. It is about 123 square miles of land, and there are another 109 square miles of water. All of this is part of Minnesota. It is the northernmost point of the continental United States. If you look at a map, it looks like an arrow pointing up. It is an odd shape. It is attached to Canada. It shares no land border with any other U.S. state. This makes it an exclave. It is a piece of one country that is surrounded by another. This is not common, and it makes life there different. It makes things a bit harder. But it also makes it special. Like, people who live there love its isolation. They love its beauty. They love the water. They love the quiet. It is a place of trees. It is a place of lakes. It is a place of wild animals. It is a remote spot, and it has a strange history. A history that goes back to a time when maps were not very good. A time when people drew lines without really knowing the land. This story starts a long time ago. It starts after a big war. It starts with a peace treaty. That treaty shaped North America. It set the stage for this little piece of Minnesota. It is a story of how a line on a map became a real border. It is a story of how a misunderstanding grew into a permanent feature. And it is a story of how people learn to live with that line. They live with its quirks. They live with its challenges. It is a unique part of the U.S., and it has a good tale to tell. We can learn a lot from its odd location. We can learn about how countries decide where they end. And where other countries begin, it is not always simple, it is rarely perfect, and sometimes it leaves a little bit of home in a very strange spot. That is the Northwest Angle. It is a piece of America, but it is surrounded by Canada. And that is its story. The main reason for this strange border is very simple. It comes from an old paper. It comes from a treaty. This treaty was signed a long, long time ago. It was signed in 1783. It was called the Treaty of Paris. This treaty ended the American Revolutionary War. It made the United States its own country, and it needed to draw its borders. It needed to show where America stopped and where British North America began. This was a big job. The people drawing these lines did their best, but they did not have good maps. They did not know the land very well. They were in Paris. They were not walking the forests of Minnesota or sailing the waters of the Great Lakes. They used the best information they had, but that information was often wrong. The treaty had very specific words. It described the border. It said the border would go through Lake Superior, then it would go through other lakes and rivers. It would follow the Long Lake, and it would go to the northwesternmost point of the Lake of the Woods. This part sounds clear enough, but then came the crucial next part. It said that from this northwesternmost point, the border would run due west to the Mississippi River. And there the problem started. This was the big mistake. This was the part that created the Northwest Angle. The people in Paris thought the Mississippi River went much further north. They thought it started somewhere near the Lake of the Woods. They believed a line drawn due west from the lake would eventually hit the Mississippi. But they were wrong. The Mississippi River does not go that far north. Its true source is much further south. It is at Lake Itasca. That is a long way from the Lake of the Woods. So a line drawn due west from the Lake of the Woods would never, ever meet the Mississippi River. It would just go into Canada, and it would keep going. It would go past the Mississippi's source. This was a big geographical blunder, but it was written down, it was signed, and it became the law of the land. Nobody knew this right away. It took time for people to explore. It took time for real surveys to happen. For years, the exact border in this remote area was unclear. People just knew it was somewhere around the Lake of the Woods. But the treaty's words were there. They were on paper, and they had to be followed. Or at least they had to be dealt with. The idea was to create a clean separation. A clear boundary between the new United States and British territory, but the lack of knowledge about the land made it messy. It made it complicated. It made it lead to this strange little corner. The northwest angle is a direct result of that phrase. Due west to the Mississippi River. It shows us that words matter, even when the geography they describe is wrong. And it shows us that history can leave us with some very odd legacies. This little bit of Minnesota is one of those legacies. It is a living reminder of an old map error. It is a testament to the power of a written agreement. Even an agreement based on bad information, and that is how it all started. A misunderstanding. A simple error, made by people who were far away, people who thought they knew the land. But they really did not. The problem with the Treaty of Paris became clear over time. Explorers and surveyors started to map the land. They found that the Mississippi River was not where the treaty makers thought it was. A line going due west from the Lake of the Woods would just go into empty space, or rather into Canadian territory without ever meeting the Mississippi. This created an unclear border. It was a border that could not be drawn as described. Both the United States and Great Britain knew this was an issue. They needed to fix it. They needed a border that actually made sense on the ground, so they tried again. They held more talks, they signed more agreements. The first attempt to clarify things happened in 1818. This was the Convention of 1818. This agreement tried to draw the border from the Lake of the Woods westward. It said the boundary would run along the 49th parallel. That is a line of latitude. It is an imaginary line that goes around the Earth. So, from the Lake of the Woods, the border would go straight west along this 49th parallel to the Stony Mountains, or the Rocky Mountains. This solved the problem for the border west of the Lake of the Woods, but it still left the Lake of the Woods part a bit messy. It did not fully explain how to connect the northwesternmost point to the 49th parallel. It did not make the exact line through the lake perfectly clear. The general idea was there, but the details were still fuzzy. The real solution came much later. It came in 1842. This was a very important treaty. It was called the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. This treaty dealt with a lot of border disputes. It solved problems along the main border. It solved problems near Lake Superior. And it finally clarified the border through the Lake of the Woods. This is the treaty that gave us the Northwest Angle as we know it today. The Webster-Ashburton Treaty said this: the border would go from the northwesternmost point of the Lake of the Woods, and from that point it would run southeasterly, in a straight line to where the 49th parallel intersected the lake. This sounds a bit complicated, but what it meant was this. They drew a diagonal line across the lake. This line connected the old northwesternmost point to the new 49th parallel line. Let's break that down a bit more. The original Treaty of Paris said to go due west from the northwesternmost point, but that didn't work. So, the 1818 Treaty established the 49th parallel as the main border going west. The 1842 Treaty then basically drew a connection. It started at the same northwesternmost point. That point is still important. It is a very specific spot on the lake, and then instead of going west into nowhere, it went southeast. It went in a straight shot. It connected that point to the 49th parallel, but it connected to the 49th parallel before the 49th parallel left the lake. Think of it like a triangle. The top corner is the northwesternmost point. The bottom side is the 49th parallel. And the treaty drew a diagonal line to close that gap. This new line created the strange shape. It created the part of Minnesota that juts up into Canada, because the border now followed the 49th parallel from the lake, all the land north of that parallel, but east of the due south line from the northwesternmost point became U.S. territory. And it was disconnected. It was left hanging. The water boundary through the Lake of the Woods now zigzagged. It went from the old point, then southeast, to the 49th parallel. Then it followed the 49th parallel west. This whole setup meant that the land area above this water border, but part of the lake itself, was also U.S. territory. Actual survey crews then went out. They marked the border. This was hard work. They used boats. They walked through dense forests. They had to find the exact northwesternmost point. That itself was a big challenge. They placed monuments. They cut clearings through the trees. They made the invisible line on a map visible on the ground. And when they were done, this unique piece of land, the Northwest Angle, was officially mapped and defined. It was clear. It was part of the United States, and it was separate from the rest of the U.S. It was a historical accident. It was a compromise. It was a way to fix an old mistake. And in doing so, they created a new, very interesting geographical feature. It is a lasting mark of how difficult it is to draw lines on Earth. especially when you are thousands of miles away and you have bad maps. This is the story of how the angle became real. It became a permanent part of the map, and it became a very real place for people to live. The life in the Northwest Angle is different. It is not like living in most other parts of Minnesota, or even most other parts of the United States. It is quiet, it is remote, and it is tied to Canada in a way few other U.S. places are. The population is small, very small. There are maybe 120 people who live there year-round. These are hardy folks. They like the peace, they like the solitude, they like the natural beauty. Most of them make their living from the lake, from fishing, and from tourists who come to fish. Getting to the Angle is an adventure. You have two main ways you can drive, but if you drive, you have to go through Canada. You drive from Warroad, Minnesota, up into Manitoba, Canada. Then you drive east for about 40 miles on Canadian roads. And then you cross back into the U.S. at the Angle. This means you cross an international border twice. You need your passport. You need to report to customs. And you do this just to go from one part of Minnesota to another part of Minnesota. It is a bit unusual. The U.S. Customs Office at the Angle is unique. It is not a typical manned border crossing. It is a small kiosk. It has a phone and a camera. When you arrive, you pick up the phone. You talk to a customs agent who is located far away, sometimes in another state. They check your passport over the video screen, they ask you questions, and then they let you in. Or out. It is called an out-of-country crossing. It is like this for both vehicles and for boats. Many people come by boat. They cross the Lake of the Woods. It is a huge lake. It has over 14,000 islands. And its waters are also part of the international border. Boaters can move freely on the lake. But if they touch land on the U.S. side, they need to report to customs. There's even an app now for that. It makes reporting your arrival easier. It is called the CBP Roam app. You can do it from your boat or phone. Winter brings its own challenges, and its own kind of beauty. When the lake freezes over, people can travel on ice roads. These are roads built right on the frozen lake. They are marked with trees or other signals. Sometimes people use snowmobiles. Sometimes they drive trucks. These ice roads allow easier access to some parts of the Angle. But they are only there for a few months of the year. When the ice melts, it's back to boats or driving through Canada. Or flying. Float planes are also common. They land right on the water. The main industries are fishing and tourism. The Lake of the Woods is famous for its walleye. People come from all over to fish here. There are resorts and lodges. These places rely heavily on visitors. They are often family-run businesses. They have been there for generations. The people who run them are experts in the lake. They know its secrets, they know where the fish are, and they know how to handle the remote lifestyle. There is a small school in Angle Inlet. It is called the Northwest Angle School. It is a one-room schoolhouse. It is one of the last remaining in Minnesota. It serves a very small number of students. Sometimes, only a handful of kids go there. This shows how tiny the community is. But it also shows their dedication. They want their kids to be able to stay in the Angle. They want them to go to school near home. If the school were to close, it would be a big problem. Families would have to move away, or their kids would have to go to boarding school, or travel long distances into Canada for school, and that would change everything. Healthcare is another big challenge. There are no doctors or hospitals in the Angle. If someone gets sick or has an accident, they need to travel. They would go to a hospital in Warroad, Minnesota. Or they might go to a closer hospital in Canada. This adds an extra layer of difficulty to life there. Emergency services can take a long time to arrive. This makes people very self-reliant. They learn to handle many things themselves. They learn to look out for their neighbors. Despite these challenges, people love living in the Angle. They value the tight-knit community. Everyone knows everyone. They help each other out. They gather for local events. They celebrate holidays together. It is a place where you truly feel connected to your surroundings. The nature is raw and beautiful. Loons call on the lake, eagles fly overhead, moose wander through the woods. It is a special place. It is a little piece of Minnesota, but it feels like its own world. It exists at the edge of two countries. It is a place that shows what it means to adapt. It shows what it means to make a home in a unique spot, and it reminds us that geography shapes our lives in very real ways. Even if that geography was made by an old mistake, the Northwest Angle is more than just a strange bit of land. It is a living example of history. It shows us how borders are made, and it shows us that sometimes they are made by accident. This little part of Minnesota reminds us of the power of old papers. It reminds us of treaties, and it reminds us of maps. even when those maps were wrong. This place teaches us about unintended consequences. When people in Paris drew that line in 1783, they just wanted to separate two countries. They had no idea they were creating such a unique geographical feature. They simply made a mistake about where the Mississippi River started. But that mistake became real. It became permanent. It shaped the lives of future generations. It made a remote corner of America truly isolated. This teaches us to be careful with details. It teaches us that words on paper can have huge impacts in the real world for hundreds of years. The angle also shows us the human side of borders. It is easy to think of borders as just lines on a map. But for the people who live near them or on them, borders are very real. They affect daily life. They decide where you go to school. They decide how you get groceries. They decide where you go for a doctor. For the residents of the Northwest Angle, the border is not just a line. It is a part of their identity. It is a constant presence. It is a routine part of their day. They cross it often. They live with its rules. This makes them good at adapting. It makes them resourceful. The history of the Angle is a story of solutions. The original problem was clear. The border couldn't go due west to the Mississippi, so countries worked together. They made new treaties, they redrew the lines. The Webster-Ashburton Treaty was a fix. It was a compromise. It acknowledged the old mistake, and it found a practical way forward. It shows that even complex international issues can be resolved, even if the solution leaves a quirky geographical feature behind. It is a testament to cooperation. It is a testament to finding common ground, even when the ground itself is confusing. And what about the future of the Northwest Angle? It will likely stay as it is. It is a settled border. It is a recognized part of the United States. Its unique status is part of its charm. It attracts visitors who seek out its remoteness. It draws people who are curious about its history. It is a place for fishing. It is a place for nature. It is a place for quiet. The people who live there will keep doing what they do. They will keep living off the land. They will keep enjoying the lake. They will keep their small community strong. They will keep navigating the border. The Northwest Angle stands as a reminder. It reminds us that geography is never simple. It reminds us that history is always present. And it reminds us that even the smallest, most out-of-the-way places have stories worth telling. It is a piece of Minnesota that belongs to Canada, in a way. Not politically, but geographically. It is a little geographical wonder. It is a place that makes you think about maps. It makes you think about countries. And it makes you think about how we all live together on this big, sometimes strangely drawn planet. It is a unique corner of the world. And it got that way because of a line on an old map. A line that pointed in the wrong direction. And that is its story.